In a small monastery library in rural France, a librarian carefully opens a leather-bound manuscript from the 13th century. The pages crackle gently, but they don't crumble. Despite being over 700 years old, this book remains remarkably intact. How is this possible? And why do modern books sometimes fall apart after just a few decades? The answer lies in forgotten preservation techniques that small libraries and monasteries have been quietly using for centuries. Techniques that the modern world largely abandoned but desperately needs to rediscover. Welcome to the Curious Route, where we explore the hidden knowledge that shapes our world. Today, we're diving into the mysterious art of book preservation, and what you're about to discover might change how you think about protecting knowledge forever. Before we reveal these ancient techniques, you need to understand what makes old books so vulnerable in the first place. Paper, leather, ink, and binding materials are all organic compounds, which means they're constantly under attack from light, humidity, temperature fluctuations, insects, mold, and the natural process of oxidation. Every time you turn a page, microscopic damage occurs. Every moment a book sits on a shelf, time itself is working to destroy it. Yet somehow monks and librarians in small institutions managed to preserve texts that survived wars, fires, floods, and centuries of use. What did they know that we've forgotten? The first technique sounds almost too simple to be effective, but it's arguably the most powerful. Environmental control without technology. Modern archives rely on climate control systems, dehumidifiers, and sophisticated monitoring equipment. But medieval monasteries had none of this. Instead, they understood architecture as preservation. Monastery libraries were built with thick stone walls that naturally regulated temperature, keeping interiors cool in summer and protecting against extreme cold in winter. Windows were positioned strategically to provide indirect light, never allowing direct sunlight to touch the books. The elevation of shelving mattered too. Books were never stored on ground-level shelves where moisture could seep up from the earth. They understood that the building itself was the first line of defense. But here's where it gets really interesting. These librarians didn't just build the right structures. They actively monitored them using methods we'd barely recognize as scientific. In one Benedictine monastery in Austria, records from the 18th century describe how librarians would place small dishes of salt in various locations throughout the library. By checking how quickly the salt absorbed moisture, they could identify problem areas before mold appeared on books. If the salt turned mushy too quickly, they knew that section needed better ventilation. This primitive but effective monitoring system required no electricity, no gauges, just observation and understanding of materials. The second forgotten technique involves the actual treatment of materials before they ever became part of a book. Medieval manuscript makers didn't just use any paper or parchment. Parchment, made from animal skins, underwent extensive preparation that included soaking in lime solution, stretching, scraping, and treating with natural compounds that made it resistant to pests and moisture. But even more fascinating is what happened with paper after it became widely available. Small monasteries and libraries developed their own paper treatment recipes using natural substances. Oak gall ink wasn't just chosen because it was dark and permanent. The tannic acid in oak galls actually has antimicrobial properties that help preserve the paper it touches. Some monasteries would treat their paper with solutions made from aromatic herbs like lavender and rosemary, not just for the pleasant smell, but because these herbs naturally repel insects that might eat paper and glue. Now, you might be thinking this all sounds very romantic but impractical for modern use. But wait until you hear what contemporary conservators discovered when they analyzed books preserved by these methods. In 2012, researchers at a small library in the Czech Republic compared books from the same period. Some preserved using traditional monastery methods and others stored in modern conditions. The traditionally preserved books showed significantly less acid degradation, fewer insect damage, and better structural integrity. The old techniques weren't just superstition, they were scientifically sound, even if the practitioners didn't understand the chemistry behind them. The third technique might surprise you because it seems counterintuitive. Regular use. Yes, you heard that right. Small libraries and monasteries believed that books needed to be handled, but handled correctly. They developed elaborate protocols for book use that modern institutions might consider excessive. Before touching a book, hands had to be washed and completely dried. In some monasteries, readers were required to wear light gloves when handling the oldest manuscripts. But more importantly, books were regularly removed from shelves, dusted with soft brushes made from badger or rabbit hair, and inspected for any signs of damage. This regular attention meant problems were caught early. A small tear could be repaired with wheat paste and Japanese tissue before it became a missing page. A loose binding could be reinforced before the book fell apart. This brings us to perhaps the most sophisticated forgotten technique: integrated pest management without chemicals. Modern libraries often resort to fumigation or chemical treatments to deal with bookworms, silverfish, and other paper-eating insects. But traditional libraries developed an ecosystem approach. They understood that certain natural predators could help control pest populations. Small spiders were tolerated in libraries because they caught insects. Cats were kept not just for mice, but because their presence discouraged many insects. The herbs we mentioned earlier, lavender, rosemary, wormwood, and rue, were strategically placed around the library, creating invisible barriers that pests wouldn't cross. Some monasteries even maintained small populations of pseudoscorpions, tiny arachnids that feed on bookless and other paper pests, but are harmless to humans and books. But the real genius of these traditional methods becomes clear when you understand the repair techniques they developed. Modern book restoration often involves expensive materials and specialized equipment. Traditional methods used what was available, but with remarkable sophistication. Wheat paste, made from flour and water, remains one of the best adhesives for paper because it's reversible, non-acidic, and flexible. Japanese tissue paper, thin but incredibly strong, could reinforce damaged pages almost invisibly. Leather bindings were treated with mixtures that might include lanolin, beeswax, and neat's foot oil, compounds that kept the leather supple without causing long-term damage. When gold leaf on illuminated manuscripts began to flake, it was carefully reattached using glaire, a binding medium made from egg whites that had been used since ancient times. What makes these techniques even more remarkable is how they were documented and passed down. Small libraries and monasteries maintained detailed records of their preservation work, creating an oral and written tradition of knowledge. Apprentice librarians spent years learning not just what to do, but why and when to do it. They learned to recognize the subtle signs of deterioration, the smell of mold before it became visible, the feel of paper that was becoming too dry and brittle, the sound a binding made when it was about to fail. This sensory knowledge, developed over decades of hands-on experience, can't be fully captured in any manual or computer program. Now here's the crucial question: why did we abandon these techniques? The answer is complicated, but essentially comes down to scale and economics. As libraries grew larger and collections expanded into the millions of volumes, the labor-intensive traditional methods seemed impractical. It was easier to build climate-controlled facilities and develop chemical treatments than to train armies of skilled conservators. But we're now discovering the limits of this approach. Many books from the 19th and 20th centuries are literally crumbling, victims of acidic paper and inappropriate storage conditions. Meanwhile, manuscripts preserved using traditional methods continue to survive. This has sparked a renaissance of interest in traditional preservation techniques, especially among small libraries, special collections, and private collectors who can't afford sophisticated modern preservation systems. They're rediscovering that low-tech doesn't mean low quality. In fact, some traditional methods are more sustainable, more reversible, and ultimately more effective than their modern alternatives. A small library in New Mexico has successfully implemented a preservation program based entirely on traditional monastery techniques, with remarkable results. Their collection of rare books from the Spanish colonial period, previously deteriorating in modern storage, has stabilized and in some cases actually improved using methods that would be familiar to a 16th century monk. The implications extend beyond just book preservation. These forgotten techniques represent a broader principle that traditional knowledge systems often contain sophisticated solutions to complex problems, solutions that emerged from centuries of careful observation and experimentation. When we dismiss these methods as primitive or outdated, we lose access to accumulated wisdom that might be exactly what we need. So what can you do with this knowledge? Even if you're not a professional librarian, these principles can help you preserve your own valuable books. Control the environment by keeping books away from direct sunlight and sources of heat or moisture. Monitor conditions by paying attention to how books feel and smell. Use books regularly but handle them properly with clean, dry hands. Consider natural pest deterrents like dried lavender sachets placed near your bookshelf. And if you have a book that needs repair, research traditional methods before reaching for modern adhesives or tape that might cause more harm than good. The preservation techniques used by small libraries and monasteries remind us that protecting knowledge requires more than just technology. It requires understanding, patience, attention, and a long-term perspective that measures success in centuries rather than quarters. In our rush to digitize everything, we sometimes forget that physical books, properly cared for, can outlast any current digital storage system. The methods that kept manuscripts alive through the Dark Ages might be exactly what we need to ensure that knowledge survives whatever challenges the future brings. These forgotten techniques aren't really forgotten. They're just waiting to be rediscovered by anyone willing to look beyond the latest preservation technology and learn from those who came before us. The next time you encounter an ancient book that has somehow survived centuries of human history, remember, it didn't survive by accident. It survived because someone, probably multiple generations of someone's, cared enough to use techniques that actually worked. Techniques we would benefit from remembering. What do you think about these traditional preservation methods? Have you ever tried to preserve an old book or document? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you found this journey into forgotten knowledge valuable, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future explorations here on the Curious Route. Until next time, keep discovering the hidden stories that connect our past to our future.